What up, aliens? It's your boy Keon, here to talk about the most riveting and exciting topic, art history. When one thinks about the Renaissance, two things come to mind, Italy and art. During the 14th and 15th centuries in Europe, there was a major stylistic shift in the art style of Europe. Medieval art, which looked like this, started to look more like this. This art style shift marked the beginning of a new age in Europe, the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a rebirth of science, learning, literature, and of course, art. Renaissance art was shaped by the humanist philosophy of the Renaissance and of an individualistic view of man. The era of art was also influenced by the classics, Roman and Greek art and architecture. Artists such as Giovanni Pisano from Italy and Jan van Eyck from the Netherlands helped create works of art centered around these influences with new oil paintings. Sculptors such as Donatello created sculptures reminiscent of that of the Roman and Greek statues. After classical art was brought back to Europe, an architect from Florence known as Filippo Brunelleschi brought back classical architecture into Europe. First, he used mathematics and linear perspective in his works, as well as a signature of Roman architecture, the arch. Romans used arches exactly twice as wide as it was high. These exact proportions contrasted with the Gothic architecture that preceded it. From the observation of the architecture of Rome came a desire for symmetry and careful proportion, in which the form and the composition of the building as a whole was considered. The arts and architecture were not funded by the church, but by wealthy patrons such as Cosimo de' Medici. This marked a significant shift in art as not as a religious medium, but as an expression of the human experience. So, what was the best artwork from the Renaissance? Was it this? Or this? Or was it this? Oh god. It's it's disgusting. Oh god, oh no. So yeah. European monarchs and nobles kinda had this thing where they married their relatives and or cousins. We'll get to that in a bit. The map of Europe in the 1450s looked a bit like this. Yeah, the borders look whack and everything. For the most part, Europe is full of kingdoms, duchies, and other monarchies. However, there are other forms of government. For example, many places in Germany and Italy were ruled by a theocracy over republics, such as Venice, Frankfurt, or the Papal States. The government of Europe until the 1450s was dominated by two concepts: feudalism and interfamily or intrafamily relationships. Feudalism is where different lords and nobles owned land, where peasants worked on those land and paid taxes to them. Nobles were then somewhat loyal to the central monarch, who themselves owned land. This created a situation where the king was weakened by powerful and ambitious nobles, and didn't have that much reach over the country. However, around this time, things were about to change. Due to needing taxes to fight the Hundred Years' War, the kings in England and France needed to increase taxes in an effort to raise money to fight. This process is called centralization, and is not unique to those two countries. This happened all over Europe in this time. So, why is centralization important? Because these disunited and bickering kingdoms could truly unify and become nations and form large empires, creating art, innovating, and learning with a centralized government, as opposed to feudal lords with self-serving ambitions, making things worse for everyone. Yeah. About the cousin marrying thing. Because Europe was dominated by monarchies, often the best way to gain power was through marriage. By sending off children to marry elsewhere, nobles could secure alliances and gain power through marriage. Marriage politics often formed the basis of many European empires. Also, in some countries, they just decided, hey, let's marry our kids with each other and keep the power with themselves. An important concept is personal unions. So what are personal unions? Personal unions are when a king or monarch of one country also happens to be the king of another country. Basically, one person rules two different countries, and to what extent each nation is independent depends on a case-to-case basis. Personal unions were everywhere in Europe, but some of the most important ones were between Castile and Aragon, later uniting into Spain, between Poland and Lithuania, and the Kalmar Union in Scandinavia. This all helped bring European nations into strong, central states with the power and control to, say, perhaps, colonize the entire world. Laws during this time were pretty weird. Medieval law was a crazy amalgamation of Roman law and the Christian Bible. In Europe, the law code of Byzantine Emperor Justinian, the Code of Justinian, was spreading everywhere. This was a simplified code of law compared to the archaic and complicated law that preceded it. This form of Roman law spread everywhere, with the exception of England and Scandinavia. Here, common law formed. Common law was different from Roman law, in which previous court cases and tradition determined the outcome of future court cases. This is known as precedent. The laws of early modern Europe contrasted with that of cruel laws of medieval Europe, and contributed to the success of the civilization.
Right now, it seems like Europe is going through a spree of technological innovation, making them a dangerous threat in battle due to the possibility of new advanced innovation. However, they are not unified, thus making them a threat to themselves. The main reason they aren't unified is because of the difference in religion from east to west. Eastern Europe is mostly Orthodox, while the West is mostly Catholic. There are also different paces of development in arts and innovation, with further development in arts and philosophy in France and the different kingdoms of Italy. I think they call it the Renaissance. Also, on the western coast, the Portuguese developed these weird triangular sailed boats, allowing them to have a faster escape route when we invade. Also, it makes it easier to set up and govern colonies, which Portugal has a few of. There are two different types of ships that were developed by the Portuguese. The first is the caravel, which is a small ship used for exploration. Based on some of these maps, they've explored pretty far. The caravel has a small crew but can fit enough cargo for a year's voyage. It also has the ability to sail towards the wind with their new fancy triangle sails. The second ship is called a carrack, which are used for war and commerce. They have high platforms at the stern and bow of the ship, allowing higher angles when firing from their ship. Carracks are also armed with cannons. However, these ships don't come without a price, literally. They're really expensive and not practical for most sailing as they have large square sails. If we decide to invade here, we should keep an eye out for carracks. Europe has also gone through some technical innovation over the past few years. Some of these innovations include the printing press, the windmill, the spinning wheel, and the mechanical clock. We should watch out for the clocks. I heard.
Yes, I do. Let's start off with the land-based military and trade. There have been some interesting developments in the likes of land, military, and trade. To start, it looks like the Ottomans have blocked Europe from Asian trade, leaving Europe weak and out of the loop when it comes to intercontinental trade and politics. It's kind of dark there, almost like a dark age. However, in some of the dark, there is still some light, in the form of guns, or as they call them, the arquebus. It's a form of light gun and does a lot of damage. The problem is they're pretty inaccurate. They also decide to take the arquebus and make them bigger, so that way they can shoot really big balls of rock and metal at large groups of enemies. Definitely a thing to watch out for when we invade. Right now, the most powerful weapon in Europe comes in the form of cavalry, from a place called Poland. They've attached metal wings to the back of their knights' armor to create the noise of 5,000 horses by using only 1,000. This tactic is used to create fear in the enemy's lines, while deafening the Polish horses from the sound of enemy gunfire, allowing them to charge head-on fearlessly into their opponent's line. In terms of trade, most is done via water, with republics like Genoa and Venice becoming rich by controlling Mediterranean trade, and Portugal broadening the map by sea, having already established their first colonies in the Azores and Cabo Verde Islands in the 1410s and 1420s. Most land trade runs through the Ottoman Empire and into the Balkans, but the Ottomans have put strict tariffs on Eurasian trade to Europe, effectively cutting them off from the outside world. When it comes to the economy, most economic systems in Europe follow what they call feudalism, meaning there is a pyramid of classes, with each of the lower classes having more people in them. The problem with feudalism is that there are very few people that can actually fight, with around half of the people being serfs, which is a nicer way of saying slaves. One example of this is the Holy Roman Empire, which isn't really holy, technically isn't Roman, and really isn't an empire, but who am I to judge? The HRE is the best example of feudalism, and is basically made up of a bunch of states and principalities which decide to gang together to make a country. Each principality is essentially independent, with the person who owns the most land being the lord of the land. Rather than getting money directly from the serfs, he hires people to collect the money for him. That person got so bored of collecting money, he decided to hire more people to collect it for him. Then you have the people at the bottom of the pyramid who are owned by the landowners and the money collectors collectors, and then above all, there's an emperor of the HRE, who the lords all owe their service to, but only if they feel like it. Unless they're going to war, but even so, only if they decide to go. That's basically how the economic system of feudalism works in the Holy Roman Empire and most of Europe. Pretty easy and straightforward if you ask me.